to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Pastor Steve Andrews. Today we continue our study in Chronicles, although technically 2 Chronicles, we're beginning the book, 2 Chronicles chapter 1. Now, before we jump into the text, just briefly, in the Hebrew Old Testament, our Bibles are translated from Hebrew and Greek, Old Testament and New. In the original Hebrew, 1st and 2nd Chronicles were simply Chronicles. 1st and 2nd Samuel, simply Samuel, and 1st and 2nd Kings, simply Kings. So, we divided them up at some point in history. 2nd Chronicles chapter 1 is our text today. 1st Chronicles dealt primarily with David and ended with his death. 2nd Chronicles will deal with everyone after King David. So, chapters 1 through 9, Solomon. 10 through 12, his son Rehoboam. 13 through 26 will be David's line, continuing down David's line up until the time of the Assyrian invasion, and then chapters 27 through 36, continuing down David's line through the time of Babylon's invasion. So that's what we'll be doing here for the next, roughly month or so, is plowing through these books. Solomon the son of David established himself in his kingdom, and Yahweh his God was with him and made him exceedingly great. Solomon spoke to all Israel, to the commanders of thousands and of hundreds, to the judges and to all the leaders in all of Israel, the heads of fathers' houses. And Solomon and all the assembly with him went to the high place that was at Gibeon, for the tent of meeting of God, which Moses the servant of Yahweh had made in the wilderness, was there. But David had brought up the ark of God from Kiriath-Jearim to the place that David had prepared for it, for he had pitched a tent for it in Jerusalem. Moreover, the bronze altar that Bezalel the son of Uri, son of Hur, had made, was there before the tabernacle of Yahweh. And Solomon and the assembly sought it out. And Solomon went up there to the bronze altar before Yahweh, which was at the tent of meeting, and offered 1,000 burnt offerings on it. In that night God appeared to Solomon and said to him, "Ask what I shall give you." And Solomon said to God, "You have shown great and steadfast love to David my father, and have made me king in his place. O Yahweh God, let your word to David my father be now fulfilled, for you have made me king over a people as numerous as the dust of the earth. Give me now wisdom and knowledge to go out and come in before this people, for who can govern this people of yours, which is so great?" God answered Solomon, "Because this was in your heart, and you have not asked for possessions, wealth, honor, or the life of those who hate you, and have not even asked for long life, but have asked for wisdom and knowledge for yourself, that you may govern my people over whom I have made you king, wisdom and knowledge are granted to you. I will also give you riches, possessions, and honor, such as none of the kings had who were before you, and none after you shall have the like." So Solomon came from the high place at Gibeon, from before the tent of meeting, to Jerusalem, and he reigned over Israel. Solomon gathered together chariots and horsemen. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen, whom he stationed in the chariot cities and with the king in Jerusalem. And the king made silver and gold as common in Jerusalem as stone, and he made cedar as plentiful as the sycamore or the shephelah. And Solomon's import of horses was from Egypt and Cu, and the king's traders would buy them from Cu for a price. They imported a chariot from Egypt for 600 shekels of silver, and a horse for 150. Likewise, through them, these were exported to all the kings of the Hittites and the kings of Syria. This is the word of the Lord. Verse 1 is a very quick overview of the beginning of Solomon's reign, that he establishes his reign. Yahweh is with him. Yahweh makes him great. Very quick summary. Good news. That Yahweh is with you is a tremendous good news. And it's spoken here of Solomon. It's spoken of other men in the Bible too. And we know it to be true also of us. That Yahweh, Jesus, is with us and in us and for us. And this is such great news. So just as he saw his father do before him, David speaking to all of Israel, to the various commanders, officers, and so forth, now Solomon does as well. Solomon gathers this assembly together, and they travel to Gibeon. Gibeon's about 5 miles northwest of Jerusalem, And their intent here is to go to the tent of meeting, which we would call the tabernacle. Exodus, the back half of the book, where Moses at Sinai is given the commands to build the tabernacle, the blueprint of all the specifics of how God would like it built, and then even how Bezalel and Oholiab will be the two men that are the master craftsmen, and there'll be others, and they'll bring the gifts and the offerings to build this house for God. So it's a tent, sometimes called the tent of meeting, and the tabernacle is also used for it. At some point here, the tent and the ark have been separated. And so King David has brought the ark into Jerusalem. They should have been together. The tabernacle remains at Gibeon, outside of the city of Jerusalem. So we have two different holy sites for God's people at the moment, and that'll be refined into one when Solomon takes care of building the temple as his father has instructed him to do. So Solomon takes his assembly out to Gibeon, where not only is the tent itself, but also the other pieces. So the tent was supposed to have the ark inside of it with the altar of incense, the table of the presence, the golden lampstand, and then outside the altar of burnt offerings. There was a basin for the priest to do the washings in. And here, that bronze altar is mentioned as being at the tabernacle, as part of this site at Gibeon. And that's what they're aiming for. Solomon and the assembly sought it out. They're looking for the altar because it's on that altar that you make offerings, sacrifices to God. And Solomon wants to do that very thing. This is good, to be commended. So he offers 1,000 burnt offerings on it. That's a lot. The purpose not actually spoken in the text of whether this is him seeking to give thanks or him seeking to have sins covered, that's not said. Simply mention that it's done. Now this is an odd detail that's missing from 1 Kings chapter 3. 1 Kings 3 has this account. It has the account of Solomon praying for wisdom that we're about to cover as well. But it doesn't mention that the high place at Gibeon is the tabernacle. It doesn't say what it is. It just says the great high place was there, although it's already mentioned that the ark is not. So if you don't have the context of Chronicles, you might be led to believe that Solomon has gone to a pagan worship site to worship who knows who at that point. So I'm not sure why that detail is missing out of Kings, but it is here in 2 Chronicles, and this is helpful. So then God comes to Solomon, appears to him, and offers him anything. The phrase blank check means something to adults. If you're younger, it might not mean much to you, since the millennial generation and Gen Z haven't really made much use of checkbooks. So, differently phrased for your children here, if God offered you anything, God will give you whatever you want, what would you ask for? I think that's a really fun question for a family to talk about. It would show you what's on our hearts. Solomon begins with essentially a prayer of the Lord's faithfulness, talking about how he has been great, how he has shown chesed, steadfast love, covenant faithfulness, mercy, kindness, however you want to translate that word, to David my father, made me king in his place. So God has been faithful to what he promised in 2 Samuel 7 of putting David's descendant on the throne. And now he's done it. In verse 9, so, O Yahweh, let your word to my father be fulfilled. You have made me king over a numerous people, as the dust of the earth. And that's a promise from the book of Genesis that comes in several different shapes. So as numerous as the stars of the heavens, as the grains of sand on the seashore, as the dust of the earth, all of those are spoken. And so Solomon's picking up on that. God has fulfilled that promise too, that he would make Abraham into a great nation, that nations would come from him. That nations, plural part, is about to happen. Well, in fairness, it already has, so Ishmael becomes his own nation and so forth. But from Isaac, from his tree, his descendants, as Rehoboam, as we'll see in a week or so, loses part of the kingdom. It splits, and it becomes multiple kingdoms. Isaac's son Esau, so across from Jacob there, the twins, Isaac's son Esau became his own nation, the nation of Edom. So certainly the Lord fulfilling his promises, and we see that. This is a possible spot then to talk as a family about the promises God has made to you and how he's been faithful in keeping them. Forgiveness of sins. Again and again, the blood Christ shed on the cross, given to you in word and sacrament. Baptism, Lord's Supper, absolution. But also the promise of paradise that the Lord is fulfilling for us even now. So Solomon then asks for wisdom and knowledge to go out, come in, that's to govern, to go before the people, to go to the throne in the palace and be able to sit before them and govern them. Who can govern them, for they're so great? This is really quite an excellent request. What is it that makes this request so good? Solomon does not request something for himself. I mean, technically you can make the case, yes, he's asking so that he can have wisdom. He's asking for himself. But the goal, the aim, is to love his neighbor. He hasn't asked for something that would be loving to himself. His thoughts, his minds are elsewhere, outside of himself. This is how we were created to be in the beginning. In Genesis 1 and 2, Adam and Eve caring not for themselves, but for one another in the creation. And so it is here. This is very good from King Solomon. And the Lord notes it, because you did not ask on behalf of yourself. You did not ask for something sinful, but for the love of your neighbor. So he could have asked for money. He could have asked for people to honor him. He could have asked for his enemies to be destroyed. He could have asked to live for 100-something years, but he didn't. And so God is going to grant him the wisdom and knowledge that he's requested to rule the people well. But in addition to that, he's also going to give him riches, possession, and honor. And this is another one that's a detail missing out of 1 Kings 3. 1 Kings 3, it's the wisdom that he has that is more than any king before or after him. But his wealth is described as being more than any king in his days. Here it's all combined under one thing, that his wisdom and his wealth and his honor will be more than any king before him or after him. The exception to that would be Jesus, of whom we read in Revelation chapter 5, verse 12, "Worthy is the Lamb who was slain, to receive power and wealth and wisdom and might and honor and glory and blessing." Verse 13, similar. Chapter 7, verse 12, similar, that Jesus is king of all. So he is advanced over Solomon, but him alone. So Solomon at that point leaves Gibeon, and he brings the people back to Jerusalem, where he will reign over them as their king for 40 years to come. Our last paragraph here then gives us the picture of some of this wealth of Solomon, and it's going to be described first militarily speaking. He's going to have chariots and horsemen. This is the first time it's specifically been noted that Israel has chariots. Pretty much the first time. 2 Samuel chapter 15, verse 1, and one of his brothers, Absalom, and 1 Kings chapter 1, verse 5, another of his brothers, Adonijah, both of them seeking to set themselves up as kings over Israel. They are noted as having chariots. But aside from this generation, the children of David, it's never been had in Israel, according to Scripture. When you look at the books of Joshua and Judges, having chariots was a sign of might and prowess for foreign armies. And it was a thing to be feared. Israel constantly found themselves afraid of these chariot armies, that they would be overrun by them. You're just a man on foot, and yet here's a horse-drawn chariot with its rider having that metal shielding around him to give him protection, and also able to move so swiftly compared to you. You're in trouble. But the picture in Joshua and Judges both is that God overcomes these chariots. God overcomes the fear of his people. He fights for them. He defends them. He protects them. He wins. Those who had the chariots are those who fell, not God's people. So Absalom and Adonijah, using chariots to try to capture the throne, a move to instill fear, perhaps, to show off their own prowess, but they fail. Now Solomon has gathered chariots. He also has 12,000 horsemen. He uses them to defend himself and in various cities throughout his land. Verse 15 is, fun in a sense. He makes silver and gold as common in Jerusalem as stone. The area is filled with stone, so now the area is filled with gold and silver. It's filled with wealth. Solomon's wealth is so great that his people benefit from it. That's not normal. Typically, a king's wealth is so great and he just keeps it all to himself. But here, the people benefit as well. And not only the precious metal, but also cedar. Cedar is a wonderful building material, has to be imported from Lebanon to the north. And now it's as common as the sycamore that grows in the Shephelah, which is the low country just around Jerusalem, which is up on the hill. And then talks about importing and exporting. He imports from Egypt and Ku, so Egypt to the south. In Africa, Ku is up in Asia Minor. It's known probably better as Tarsus. It's a Hittite city. So Solomon's trading with these foreign nations. The amount of 600 shekels of silver, there are 2/5 of an ounce per shekel. So he was paying 240 shekels per chariot, which is about $4,800 if they valued silver the way we do today, and a horse for 60 ounces of silver, which is about $1,200 by the way we measure it today. So just rough estimates for you to consider. So they're not only importing, which meant they were sending money out, but they were also exporting, which means they're bringing money in to the kingdom. Maybe a second question on this text: what are some of the weapons that bring fear today? Or even more generically, what are some of the things in the world that bring fear today? Recall how God conquered those chariot armies. And remember that God is the one who defends us as well. It's not us who are triumphant. It is Christ who is triumphant. And because we are in Christ, the Bible can then say that we are also triumphant. We have overcome, not by our own doing, but by his. He will defend us. It may not look like what we expect, but he fights for his people. And we rejoice.